All right, what's up, everybody? We got a special treat for you today. So this is going to be the first episode in a two-part series of a green buying panel that was hosted by Cafe Imports at this year's Specialty Coffee Association Annual Expo in Houston. Cafe Imports reached out and asked if we wanted to be a part of it, and we said, absolutely, that would be incredible. So green buying is one part of the coffee industry that's often shrouded in mystery. It feels like something that a lot of people talk about, but a lot of people don't have firsthand experience with. And they got a really incredible group of people together to shed some light on what's happening in modern green buying. So the panel consisted of Omar Herrero and Piero Cristiani from Cafe Imports, Susan Heller-Evanson of Atlas Coffee, Charlie Habiger from Royal Coffee, and then I was acting as the moderator and sort of the advocate or voice for the roaster retailers out there. So for this first episode, we're going to focus on two main topics, and those topics are the booming C market and just all things C market in general, and the impact of tariffs in the green buying space. We've touched a little bit on the C market. If you've been listening for the past few weeks, you've likely heard me and Charles batting around some C market stuff, but this is a much more in-depth and high-resolution look at the C market. This part of the conversation was really fun for me because I learned so much about how the C market interacts with the specialty market. You know, I've long been told that those two things operate completely independently, but as you'll hear from this conversation, it's not exactly true. Same thing with tariffs. We've touched on tariffs a little bit, and here, again, just that higher resolution look. How are they going to affect people all the way down the line, not just us as roaster retailers, but people who are importing and exporting coffee, and even farmers who are growing coffee at origin. This was on a Saturday morning. The place was packed, and everyone was so attentive. It was about the best event that I could ever dream of going to, and that it really meant a lot that everybody came out. So if you were there, thank you. We know you've got a lot of options on how you can spend your Saturday morning on Expo weekend. So just huge shout out to everyone for showing up. Huge shout out to Cafe Imports for hosting, all of the panelists for donating their time, the team at Cafe Imports, and our team at Cat and Cloud for setting up. And yeah, thank you out there for listening. This conversation is really in-depth and really rich, so we hope you enjoy it. Let's get into part one of Source, a green buying panel hosted by Cafe Imports. Thank you, Noah. Appreciate that. Thanks everyone for coming. I know it's early in the morning. I know there's a lot of things to do at Expo. We're going to introduce the panel in just a second, but I just kind of wanted to get a lay of the land and see who we're talking to in the room. So if you're brave enough to raise your hands, who works in green coffee sourcing? Who's a green buyer in here? All right. And then who is roaster retailer? You roast coffee, buy coffee. All right. And then got any baristas in here? That's right. Okay, cool. So just to get it going, I just want to introduce everybody here. So if you guys want to take a moment, sum up your life in 1 minute, please. Your entire life.
I'll try to do it a little bit less, but my name's Omar Herrera. I work at Cafe Imports. I'm a coffee buyer there, and I work in Colombia and Mexico, where I live, and I buy coffee. Pretty simple.
Hi, my name is Piero, and I've been working for Cafe Imports for about 15 years now. Currently work in Latin America, Asia, and sourcing micro lots and also full containers of high-end coffee.
Hi everyone, I'm Susan Heller-Evanson. I've been with Atlas Coffee Importers for about 15 years in a variety of roles. For the last 10 or so, I've been on the trading team and manage our Africa and mainland Asia buying. I also sit in front of 3 screens and stare at a lot of Excel sheets all day, so it's not all travel and fun. Although I do think that Excel is quite fun. I'm one of those people. We can talk about formulas offline, and I'll pass it to Charlie.
Nice. I'm Charlie Habiger. I work with Royal Coffee. I've been with Royal for 5 years, and before that, I was a coffee buyer for different roasting companies for many years, so I've actually been a customer of both Cafe Imports and Atlas in the past. My job at Royal is a buyer and a marketer of coffees. And so I work with pretty much all the different buying teams at Royal because we have about 15 traders at our business. And everybody has their own specialty, of course, where they buy coffee, where they're strong, what they know about, the experience that they have. And I work a little bit with pretty much all of them. And one sort of niche area for me is microlots, difficult consolidations with multiple exporters and multiple buyers on the other side. Direct trade facilitation is very big for us as well. And if you know Royal Coffee, you know that we have various like microlot sales programs where we have online sales with shipping included in 50-pound boxes and 10-kilo boxes. And I'm very involved in the curation for those programs as well as the marketing.
Awesome, thank you. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Chris Baka. I co-own Cat and Cloud Coffee in Santa Cruz. We roast coffee. We have 4 cafes. I'm not a green buyer. I'm here to keep the conversation rolling. These are the experts. I'll throw this at the panel. Just want to get it going. I'm just going to throw a big can of worms at y'all. Yep. 2 things that came on our radar really early in the year. I mean, obviously the incredibly high C market, backed up by tariffs. I think it's on everyone's mind. It's definitely hitting our pocketbooks. How are tariffs and the super high C market, and you can take these separately or together, going to affect the way people in this room buy coffee, specifically specialty coffee? What can we expect?
Okay, I'm holding the mic. So I'm going to pass it very soon. I would start, I don't want to try and say everything, and I can't, but I would just start by giving our perspective and the effect that tariffs have on accessibility to coffee. And not just tariffs, because tariffs are a great example of cost volatility. You can't sell anything, whether it's coffee or anything else. You can't sell it if you don't know what it costs, if you expect to not lose money, And what happened in the last 6-8 months was a huge increase in the global coffee market. So in nominal dollars, the highest prices we've ever seen. Adjusted for inflation, not the highest cost we've ever seen, but the highest number, right? And this is very shocking to a lot of people. And then on top of that, you start to have tariffs. So you start to have these giant jumps of cost on top of an already high market. Because tariffs are a percentage, it means a $4 coffee market with a 10% tariff, that's a 40-cent jump. And I'm not going to speak for any other importer, but for importers of almost anything, whether it's coffee or anything else, the types of margins that they have, because importation is a business of scale. That's why importers are valuable, and that's why there are few of them, is because the scale, the consolidation of the movement of the product, like this really matters to people. This is, any coffee that anyone roasts does have to be imported. If it's imported by the roaster is the importer, So that is really important, and margins tend to be very small, smaller than any tariff that has been added to coffee. So I think the coverage in the media about the effect of tariffs for importers of anything is a little bit more like it's just a capitalist impulse for importers to pass tariffs on to their customers, like, we don't want to pay, rather than it being described as something that is existential for the survival of importers, which it really is. So back to the accessibility, and then I'll pass the mic. When we don't know what coffee costs, and with tariffs and with a market that's changing 20, 30, maybe 40 cents in a day, we often don't know what our coffee costs. Royal Coffee has coffee on the ocean all over the world, coming to California, to Canada, to Asia, to the Middle East, and we simply don't know what it costs in a climate like this, which means that we can't sell that coffee. So the impact of all the tariffs and the market volatility on us means we have to shut down access to certain coffees so that we can accurately price it. The ultimate example of this was Liberation Day in the United States, when all the new tariffs, the retaliatory tariffs, were announced. At one point, Royal Coffee stopped selling. We shut down as a business because we simply couldn't control all of our costs. We didn't know what coffee was going to cost. So my main message here to everybody in the room is instability and volatility. It takes away your access to coffee, right? Price is one thing, but instability can shut down access to coffee in certain parts of the world if people don't know what it costs, right? Stability is important because it allows you to buy coffee on a forward basis. It allows you to buy spot coffee comfortably and everything in between. And when we don't know what things cost, we simply can't offer coffee accurately because we don't know if we're going to lose money or not. We don't know if it's accurate to you or if there are going to be costs, after a sale that we incur. So all this instability shuts down your access to coffee, and we have to be the bearers of that news, and it's very hard.
I had one more follow-up for you before you passed the mic, even though you were so generously eager to pass it. I'm so sorry. In our pregame talks preparing for this, you talked about price averaging as a tool to maneuver through these situations, and that's something that I had never heard of. So what is price averaging, and how does it work?
Great. Price averaging is a very simple way of us taking the volatility in pricing for coffee that is incoming to our physical position and trying to help all coffees that are similar, that might have very different prices fixed to them because of volatility in the market, and trying to make that consistent for our buyers. So this is a very normal thing. Like if coffee's sold on a differential, and if you have an exporter who's fixing their price, they might have the same, let's say it's a 50-cent per pound differential on top of the C market, and the C market is doing this, every day. You might have the same exporter who's fixing coffee up here, who's fixing coffee down here, and the final prices can be wildly different. And that is something that can be very stressful for roasters because they are trying to control their costs. So for us, where we can, we take volatility on the coffee that we are buying and try to do our best to average it out so that the same types of coffee, if we have multiple lots of the same type of coffee, has a similar price that helps roasters buy incrementally, plan ahead, and control their own costs. So the more fluctuation, the more often we try to do this in order to make the way that we sell coffee more easy to understand, easy to navigate, and things like that.
Got it. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Appreciate that.
I'd like to just say everything that Charlie said. I'll agree with him. I'll just speak to a couple small examples with tariffs. One, I think how it changes is especially it just increases it increases the unknowns. Obviously, for all of you too, or roasters, I feel like the amount of things in our control that we can predict just get lower and lower. So for example, I'm in the middle of wanting to buy another container from Myanmar, and the reciprocal tariffs there are almost 50%. And the harvest is going on right now, and we try to ship early in the summer, but there's usually delays with kind of this, all of the uncertainty in that country. And so we're trying to figure out I want to buy this coffee, but can roasters shoulder 50% on top of an already expensive coffee? That, absolutely the value of that coffee I think is worth it, but we all have our budgets. So I think that's been really hard. I've had conversations, can you ship this by June so that we know that it'll be 10% instead of potentially much higher. And then another thing is just that for tariffs, it's the price. Charlie was talking about how producers might fix. The market is so volatile that, one day it might be at 420, and then not long after it'll go down to 350. Right now, the tariffs that we just got our first Customs and Border Patrol invoicing, and that invoice is based on the purchase side, so the invoice that we get from the exporter. So say I have a back-to-back client and the roaster fixed when the market was in that low swing, but the producer had fixed when it was high. Depending on how an importer is going to handle their tariffs, that 10% is based on that invoice we get, that higher invoice. So again, every importer might handle it differently, but just that it is complicated, the volatility makes it really hard.
What was your question again? Remind me.
I just wanted to open the door for everybody to riff on tariffs in the really high C market, honestly, getting everyone's opinion on how those are going to affect not only the work that you do, but the whole supply chain. I mean, producers are affected by it. We're certainly affected by it in the roasting and retail world.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has affected a lot of things. I work in Mexico, for example, where we were operating under the assumption that we would have 25% tariffs from the beginning of the harvest. So in that way, it caused a lot of uncertainty. We didn't know if we were going to purchase coffee because we didn't know if people were going to purchase coffee from us at 25% extra. So that definitely messed with our strategy. And then from one day to the next, it was a switch, right? We didn't have tariffs in Mexico, and then we did in the other place that I work, which is Colombia. So it kind of just turned everything upside down. I'm an optimist, so I think that things are going to be okay. I also think that potentially these tariffs will go away. But that's the problem, is all the uncertainty, right? So if we buy a bunch of coffee now and we bring it in today, that coffee is going to cost 10% at minimum more than coffee that we might buy 2 months from now. But at the same time, coffee doesn't wait, right? Coffee doesn't wait for you to make your decisions. It grows, it's available, and if you don't buy it and someone else does, you might miss an opportunity. So there was definitely the possibility that we would be out for the entire year of Mexican coffee. And then this whole thing happened, and we had to work really quickly to be able to secure that coffee so that our customers had that, especially in the landscape where Mexican coffee is now, people are using this like phrase like tariff-free, which is kind of, it's strange, but it's like tariff-free coffee. I've heard that a lot. But yes, like I said, there's just a lot of uncertainty. So in an industry where you have to make decisions really, really quickly, it is causing a lot of delays. And it's not just us. You know, it's the feedback that I hear from exporters and producers are that people are just super hesitant to move forward with things. And not just in Mexico, but all over the world. Like I said, I think that things are going to be okay. One thing that I've always kind of seen is, you know, we're always worried about prices getting super high or certain problems, but people keep buying coffee. People keep consuming coffee. People keep purchasing it. I think that it's up to the roasters right now. I mean, I think that this is something that we knew months ago, a year ago, is that, and one thing that I haven't really seen reflected in the market is that roasters haven't raised their prices much. And it's something that everyone's super hesitant to do because we're all expecting for the market to come down dramatically or for there not to be any tariffs. But in that space, people are losing money, and that's going to affect the future. So I think that right now the key is that we have to pass, like the same way that we do with these tariffs, pass those costs on to the roasters. The roasters have to do that to the consuming side. And I think that that's going to be a lot of discomfort for a little bit, but it's necessary, right? Coffee will get more expensive just like everything else will. I think, you know, not us in this room potentially, but the entire world's been operating under the fact that coffee should cost $1 per cup. And that's not the reality in any sense.
Right. So speaking from a business owner's perspective, one of the things that's interesting about what you're saying is what we're trying to figure out is how much of this is temporary? How much do we want to pass on? How much do we want to eat? So when the market was just really, really high and we're doing our financial forecasting for the year, we're staring down the barrel of this thing because of the market and how a lot of coffee buying is done on differentials, and we can talk about that a little bit too. We're going to have about $100,000 less cash to the bottom line from the business this year than last year. So that was something we were just staring down at the beginning of the year. Then the tariffs come into play, 10% on top of everything else that we're bringing in, and then that's a completely different number. So we are hesitant as a roaster retailer to pass those costs on right away to our wholesale partners or to our consumers because we're not sure when they're going to go away or if they're going to go away. So the coffee market has seen spikes and highs and lows. So our initial thought originally was like, okay, can we ride this wave out, not pass a ton of costs on to the consumer, and then be okay? It'll be not the most awesome year we've had on the books, but we'll be fine as a business. And the same thing with tariffs. So one of the things that I'd be curious to hear is what we're doing in the tariff world is our retail stores are awesome. Our guest experience is awesome. I'm really proud of it, and we can control a lot of things in there. So we just implemented or are about to implement 3.5% tariff surcharge that will just get tacked on to every transaction. And then if and when tariffs go away, that will just roll off. It'll disappear. So we didn't want to do a price increase because price increases are sticky. You know, once prices go up, they almost never go down. So if tariffs go away, it'd be great to just like pull that off the table. So how long do you think this is going to last? I know nobody exactly knows, but how are you planning for this in your business? Because they're costs to you as well.
Well, that's good because I wanted to add something about direct trade specifically because it's something I spend a lot of time on. And when tariffs were coming up, starting with Mexico, which was one of the first origins that we anticipated tariffs for, we had to change our contracts with roasters to get them to acknowledge that if there was a tariff added to their coffee, and it's still pretty unknown, that they have to be willing to pay this. So for the first time for us as importers, trying to help roasters get the coffees that they really love, that they work really hard on, we had to get them to agree to an uncertain final price. So for a roaster, it sort of doesn't matter how big you are. This is a huge unknown and a huge commitment that you have to make. And for us, a direct trade contract is a 2-page contract. There's coffee details, and then the second page is basically the direct trade agreement. And it's like a few points about, you know, the final buyer of the coffee acknowledges that like this was their decision, the price is their price, and they have, you know, approved the quality and all that stuff. And when the coffee arrives, it's theirs for the taking. And if anything goes wrong, Royal Coffee, because we have a network of lots of different roasters, worst case scenario, we can try to find a different buyer for the coffee at the same price. We can work with the seller of the coffee to try and find an alternative. Like we can step in and help. Worst case scenario, this almost never happens. When the tariffs came in, we were like, what's going to happen to direct trade? You know, because a roaster who budgets maybe, you know, I don't know, $150,000 for a really important container. Now there's a 30% tariff on top of that. So now it's a $200,000 container. And it's just like, who's budgeting for this? We, as Royal, add the tariff into the cost of coffee. So there's no prepayment for the roaster or anything like that. It gets divided into the cost per pound. It's financed the same. It's stored the same, all that stuff. It's just the same as having a higher overall price.
Right.
But with direct trade, you might, like, we had roasters at the end of 2024 who are traveling to Guatemala. They're traveling to other places. They're meeting their suppliers, good friends of theirs. They're wanting to book the same coffees that they always book. And they come to us, hey, we have this all figured out. And we're like, great, well, we can't actually tell you what this is going to cost. So if you want the coffee, you need to agree to this. And I, like Omar, am feeling really optimistic because we actually haven't had any roasters cancel their direct trade contracts as a result. Everybody has signed for their coffee, which is a great feeling. But we've also, because the market is so high, we're not only talking about tariffs. I think at this point, the market's been high for long enough where there's been enough like analysis on the effects of a high market at origin, like the effects of it for exporters who are trying to get coffee from the field and the risk of default during a really high market year. Because most growers, if they have options, you know, high market price, it can mean faster payments for less work. It can mean selling locally, things like that. And people can start to not deliver and not, you know, fulfill their contracts. This is a big risk for us. And we've seen in this climate, even some of the best quality exporters of microlots have to go back to their direct trade buyers and say, we thought we were going to have 100 bags for you at this price. Actually, we're going to have 40 bags for you. It's going to be 50 cents more a pound because that's what it cost for us to go get the cherry from our growers because they wouldn't take anything less. This is just the local price. So we've been in a situation, I've been in a situation where producers of coffee have to renegotiate a direct trade contract after they create it. And then we have to put tariffs on top of that. So from the roaster's perspective, this is an insane amount of pressure, but I haven't seen anyone cancel a contract. And this is like, makes my heart happy. You know what I mean? And it's really good to see. And I know that it's not an easy decision because it is an unknown. We literally have to put like any change in the final price due to tariffs, et cetera, blah, 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 will be paid for by the roasters, and everybody's signing. And that's great. But I respect what a difficult decision that is.
I think that that's a brilliant idea. I think that it's drawing attention to the reality of the situation, that this is not us just increasing our costs, your tariff surcharge. And it's something that you can turn off anytime you want, right? So if the tariffs go away tomorrow, you can turn it off. Even though you still have coffee that you maybe purchased at those prices and things like that. But I think that that's one of the steps that we kind of get there. We're drawing attention to the fact that things are just more expensive. And like I said, coffee prices for roasted coffee haven't changed much, but the green coffee cost has exponentially. Right now in Colombia, for example, we're buying standard coffees that are at a price that last year were what you would pay for microlots and things like that. So things are just more expensive. They're going to continue to get more expensive. Sorry, but like I said, I think that the industry just has to move. And has to act on it, and has to do away with the myth that coffee should be very, very cheap. I mean, we all know that here in this room. I think that people outside don't so much, but we have to educate them, and that's kind of up to us, I think.
I think if prices for consumers were to adjust up to, let's call it like a $4 C market for the long term, if that becomes the new normal, then if prices to the consumers does successfully adjust, not that that's easy, then it's like, well, relatively speaking, we're all just working in coffee like we always were. It's just coffee costs $4 and coffee's more expensive to consumers, and that's that. Like margins are individual for the most part, and it's something that everyone has to decide for themselves. It's not easy to raise your prices for consumers. If you have grocery accounts, like they're famously ruthless on price. But it's like, well, if 400 cents per pound for the C market, if that's the new normal, we have no choice, right? Everything has to adjust downstream if this is going to continue. The volumes that we like, the qualities that we like, even the conventional specialty coffees that we like, the low differential coffees, if those are going to be sustainable, like a $5 a pound mediocre Brazil without a lot of traceability, that could be the new normal for your blends. And if that's the case, better to anticipate that.
Yeah, that resonates. The thing that's tricky from the retailer side is that we're not just dealing with margins on one product. We're dealing with increased costs and increased margins on almost every product we have. And especially, so for us, we don't have a huge company. We have about 100 employees, reasonable sized company, and there's a lot of moving factors in the way we do our business. So one of them is just simply, let's say, minimum wage. So since we opened in 2016, minimum wage has gone up, about $1, sometimes 75 cents every year. But minimum wage going up isn't just increasing minimum wage. You increase the differential for all of the people on staff, or, over the course of, you got people here that have been working for us for 8 years, If you just increase minimum wage, it's not great for everybody. You got frontliners making more than team leaders, and that just doesn't work. So, and that's just one metric. Then there's, food, specifically eggs have been incredibly fun this year. But basically all of our costs of goods are going up, and coffee is just another level on top of that. And I think everybody in this room would agree with some of the things that you're saying. You're talking about bringing coffee in, it's going to get hit with a high tariff, and it's still worth it. And I think everybody believes that. Like, I agree with everything that you're saying too. It's like the market does have to move at some point. Like, coffee isn't cheap. The coffees that we're interacting with, they are special. That's why we're all in this room. That's why we're all in love with the things that we do. And I think there is room, and I think a lot of different things have to change for us to be able to show that value to the end consumer and communicate those things. But it is tricky. So while I agree with everything you're saying, I also feel the pain of, people coming into the shop every day, and prices have already been going up. Like, we've already been increasing those over time. So seeing it is, I don't know, we're on a path for sure. One of the things that I thought was really interesting too, and this is connected to the market, not directly related to tariffs, but we've touched on it a little bit. So back in the day, one of the things that I'd often heard people say about coffee is, oh, we're a specialty coffee roaster. The C market doesn't matter to us at all because we pay well over C market prices for all of our coffees. So prices still seem to fluctuate with the C market. How are these things connected? Like, what is the impact of the C market on the super high-end specialty coffees? I mean, we could talk about differentials, but what else is there that links these two?
I think this is an interesting question because often, I'd love if we could separate specialty coffee from the C market. But the reality is, even if I buy a coffee at an outright fixed price, the local cherry price, everyone's following the C market. There are WhatsApp groups in producing countries. There's WhatsApp groups everywhere following that C market, and the local cherry price often will fluctuate with the global C market. So that's why it makes, if you have an outright price contract that is well above, then it's a little less insulated. But a lot of producers, if they're doing outright price, that could be great if the market drops. But if it goes up, then they are stuck with that even as their costs are increasing. So if you're a smallholder producer with a couple hundred trees, which are in places like Rwanda and Burundi and Congo is really common, then that could be great as long as you still have demand. But if you're a cooperative, if you're an exporter, if you're a mill, then all of a sudden you have sold this coffee for, let's say, $4.50 a pound. But you're buying cherry and you're trying to buy cherry with a lot of competition, and that price is going up daily. And it's really hard to keep up with that. So that's a lot of the reasons why you have a differential, because that can fluctuate, especially during harvest when you have all of your biggest expenses with either seasonal labor, with the cost of cherry. So I think that makes it just incredibly volatile and risky for producers. And when the market was, I remember when we'd have days where I was like, the market fluctuated 7 cents today. Can you guys believe it? And now it will go 20 cents, And so I think outright pricing used to be a little bit more stable because we had a more stable market. So I think the volatility more than the high prices and the tariffs are hard, but I think the volatility is what we're all struggling with. If you knew you could raise your prices once a year or once every 6 months and that you could cover it, but that volatility is really hard. And I do think importers have it a little easier because roasters, we're talking about the C market, and a lot of us sell based on replacement. And so there is this, we're used to having daily changes in our pricing. And I really feel for roasters where, before I was in coffee, I didn't know is the seed of a fruit, and so there's a long way to go toward educating consumers and changing that. So my hope is that maybe this really will be an opportunity to educate. Trial by fire, it's like not a situation we want to be, but to educate consumers just about all that volatility going into it.
Yeah, I think one of the most challenging things with the high C market has been price discovery. Like, what's the actual differential or what's the actual cost of this coffee? When the C market was much lower, and it was pretty stable, we had a good idea of, okay, these coffees are worth about this much. Obviously now with the coffee market or the C market much higher, it's been challenging, and I've seen a big range of differentials or offers from exporters. So knowing exactly or trying to understand what the real cost is or what a competitive differential is. The coffee market is already high, so producers are already making good amount of money, but then we trade on differentials. So determining what the real differential is one of the challenges. And there's also this phenomenon where the C market has been inverted. Basically, the market from has gone. I mean, from month to month. When you fix the coffee, it's usually goes up, but now it's the other way around, where it's inverted. So every time you have a fixation on a coffee, and you have to roll over your position from 1 month to the next, that basically means that you have to add that difference in the differential. So that's also been another challenging thing. So yeah.
I want to say something really similar to what Susan said to answer the question about fixed prices and how the C market affects people buying fixed price coffees from producers. And most of the time, this is in the case of direct trade, right? For people who know their producers, they have a stable cost that historically is like well above C market volatility. Like I think for most of my time as a buyer working for coffee roasters, obviously since 2020, everything has been haywire, but my time working with coffee roasters, there were a lot of extremely low years in the C market, but an average year was considered to be somewhere between 120 cents per pound and like 180 cents per pound. Then we had a few years where it was closer to $1 and it just couldn't come up. But for the most part, the C market was like pathetic price-wise, and it was negligible and it was irrelevant, right? If you were buying $4.50 coffee annually, it was like all good. But like Susan was saying, the C market affects local prices in almost every single coffee origin around the world. So anyone selling you a fixed price coffee year over year, their entire life is consumed by navigating local prices, figuring out how to pay their people, obviously their cost of inputs too, but like just the coffee, where the coffee is concerned, the C market dictates the whole landscape of business in a coffee producing origin. So even a really nice mill that, you know, has a dry milling line that's like miniature and that's just for micro lots, and you have like a beautiful company with a beautiful cupping lab, and all their growers are exactly the right size for you to buy 100% of their production, which you're probably still not getting because there's probably lots of bad coffee that they're not offering to you that has to be blended somewhere else. This is stuff we all know. Even if the scale is like perfect for your roasting company, the ability for that exporter to offer you these perfect coffees year after year depends on their ability to manage their finances correctly, to navigate the local buying landscape, and to be solvent as a business. Like if I'm importing $7 a pound anaerobics from a particular country and it works perfectly and everything is fixed price and the market is irrelevant, that doesn't mean that Royal stays in business because we did that one coffee. It's like Royal stays in business because we can navigate all of the changes everywhere else in the world that affects all the rest of the coffee. So probably everyone in this room is comfortable with the idea that even if you're buying, you know, a micro lot of coffee and you're paying a fixed price, or you're buying containers of coffee at a fixed price from the same estate year after year, and the size feels right, it doesn't mean that where the coffee is coming from is not greatly affected all the time by prices. You know, there's a lot of impact that price volatility has on people's ability to get labor, you know, the amount of coffee remaining on a particular estate that needs to be picked. Depending on local prices at the time, it may or may not be worth for pickers to sign up with that estate to actually work there if they think there is or isn't enough cherry. I'll give one quick example, which is Royal Coffee has an employee who lives in a small community outside of Marcala in Honduras, and she and her husband every year create about 1 container of coffee. And these are like 5, 6, 7, 10 bag lots for the most part, all individual farms. They drive their own pickup truck around through the community. They pick up the quintales of parchment. They dry the coffee at Mayra's mother's house in Marcala. They take all their own moisture measurements, everything. They bag the coffee themselves. They use local millers. It's all just like a family business. And this year, they decided not to sell any coffee. Why? Because all of their growers relied on Mayra and her husband in the past to get them the extra $1 per pound and fix their price high. And all their buyers were happy with it. It was stable for many years. But the local price got so high that Mayra and her husband decided that they couldn't reasonably ask the growers to sell them the same coffee when they could do less work and get a higher price faster. So in the interest of the farmers in this area, they said no coffee this year. We're not exporting anything. Sorry, we're taking the year off. And it's in the best interest of the farmers because, why? Because the C market was high, even though they sold coffee for a fixed price for like 10 years in a row, you know, and no roasters got the coffee. And everyone had to learn that the C market was the reason why, even if it never was in the past.
Hello, I have a follow-up question. Is there concern about a bit of like a bullwhip effect of, so I know Omar is saying like at the beginning of this Mexican buy, there's still the anticipation of the demand, but that might go down, and that's causing a little bit of hesitation on behalf of the importers, what y'all are going to buy. How is that going to affect next year's production? And is that going to bullwhip into shorter supply trigger? Like, is it going to spiral, and are we going to have kind of like what decaf is going through right now? Are we going to see that next year across coffees?
Yeah, I just wanted to address the C market really quick. Like capitalism, it's inescapable, right? So there's people who say, oh, I don't pay attention to the C market when I'm buying coffee. I pay really good prices. If we've been paying $5 for really nice 90-point coffee with a relationship and everything like that, and the standard price of coffee is $4.50, $5 is not that much more, right? And so in Colombia, for example, prices right now are 3 million pesos, around there, per 125 kilos of parchment. That's what we were paying about a year ago for something that was like 84, 83-ish points. A pretty nice coffee, not just standard. When I'm talking about 3 million pesos per carga, 125 kilos of parchment, that's just standard coffee. That's coffee that the producer can deliver just milling the cherry and dropping it off somewhere. So there's not that much more of an incentive to create specialty coffee, to wait another 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, to process your coffee really well, to dry it longer if it's a natural or a honey, to risk your like line of financing so many months by not getting paid, to sell it at a price that the price might go up, the price might go down in the future. So it's creating also this downward quality trend, right? Producers are saying, all right, instead of waiting and processing all this coffee, I'm going to deliver the coffee right now at today's prices. So again, anyone who says that, oh, we don't pay attention to the C market, we all do, even if we're not keeping that present in our mind, right? It also affects things like locally, like land prices. When prices are super high, the value of the land for growing coffee goes up. When they're down, they also go down. It affects prices for fertilizers, which also run on their own market. Fertilizers are at an all-time high. There's also external factors like wars and things like that that are making prices go up. So it's all intertwined. You know, like if you're paying $25 a pound for a Panamanian coffee and you say that this is the best price and it's not related to the C market, if the C market comes up to $20, then that's not such a good price anymore, right? To answer your question, I'm not sure. I think that people have still been selling coffee. You know, there's not a lot of producers who have been holding on to coffee, especially with prices where they are now. You know, in Mexico, for example, there's people who are delivering to certified stocks, so not selling their coffee in specialty, but still selling their coffee to the certified stocks. So I think that a little bit of the hesitancy, it'll impact it in the future. But I think climate change, the high prices are a lot more of a threat than the hesitation and the tariffs. That makes sense.
And a phenomenon that I saw this year in regarding high prices and being able to sell coffee at a really good price without being super high quality was in Chalatenango. Usually they produce Pacamara and Pacas. And a lot of the producers this year, what they did was they sold all their Pacas or most of their Pacas, which is usually a lower cupping score, just to get quick cash. And then they left the Pacamaras, which is what they offered to us, because they know that they can get a much better price. So I think that's kind of a middle ground on where a producer will not just sell everything as commercial, but they'll hedge their bets and get some quick cash, and then also get some or keep their customers. Because I think, obviously I think producers need to do whatever they need to do, whatever is best for them. But at the same time, I think it's also important to have a little bit of continuity with your customers, even when the C market is high, because even when the C market is low, we're still there, we're still buying. So I think that's important, but at the same time, I think producers need to do what they need to do in order to yeah.
Regarding the bullwhip phenomenon, there is a historical pattern of during a really high market period, coffee looks like a pretty good business, So people, they cut down the forest, they plant more of it, they plant at lower elevations, more coffee, awesome, prices are good. But it takes a coffee tree a few years to actually start producing for the most part. And so then when all this new coffee is available and everyone's trying to sell, suddenly the market falls as a result. We see this just in Brazil. This has happened many times over the last few decades. And Brazil, unlike a lot of other origins in the world, are very good at holding their coffee. They have silos. There's a lot of post-harvest technology that allows people to preserve coffee. They ship coffee 12 months a year without issue for the most part. So they can be strategic that way. But at the farming level, high prices make coffee look like a really great idea. If you're rural and you're trying to make money and you need a cash crop of some kind, you need some sort of income stream, and you have options between basically, you can only do so many things with your property, coffee starts to look really excellent, during hard market years. But extra supply tends to bring the market down. And so typically that's where the pressure comes out of the market. If we're just looking at supply and demand, obviously there's lots of other factors. So is that going to happen here? We don't necessarily know. There's this interesting, I don't know, I guess it's interesting. It's maybe also terrible, but Piero mentioned, the C market is abnormal right now. Typically prices for coffee that's further ahead in time, it's more expensive. And right now, the prices are lower, which means that coffee that's closer in time, spot coffee that's nearby, is more desirable to people. And this is in times of insecurity, people want to get the coffee they can get. They don't really want to book super far forward if they don't know what those prices are going to be. And really, since the beginning of the pandemic, the market has been in this very inverted phase. And it could be that all of these sudden tariffs, if they only last a short period of time, they can jack up prices on coffees that are nearby. And then if the tariffs go away, suddenly everyone wants to book forward again. Why? Because all those coffees are 10% cheaper or 30% cheaper. And that might actually fix the market for the first time in 5 years. Not that we have the administration to thank personally for that. Like I said, it could be a bad thing, but it is it's an interesting, change that we're kind of waiting to see if this might happen. Because, and why do we a normal coffee market is because it's realistic for the cost of people like us who are storing coffee and financing it. We buy a coffee from Ethiopia, it ships from Djibouti. It takes maybe 60 days or 75 days to get to Oakland in California. If we have a roaster who then wants to start taking delivery in another month or two, now that's 5 months, we're paying interest on the full cost of that coffee before we actually collect any money for it. So for us, the longer we hold coffee, the more expensive it is. So when the market is inverted like that, it can mean a loss over time for people who are financing coffee, and that's why we do want a properly fixed market. There was only one other thing I was going to add to Omar's comment, which is a really high coffee market also typically means security concerns, because if coffee is suddenly very valuable, a truck on its way to a port, instead of being $40,000 US in value in a $1 market, suddenly it's $160,000. And all you have to do is, jack the truck and sell it somewhere else. And great. This is also a pretty good looking business for people as well. And so even fixed price coffees, if you have a producer who wants to keep your prices stable, they still have to cost in, a lot of cases, extra security to make sure your coffee is safe. you know? And that's a concern. It's sort of irregardless of the quality of the coffee or how well it's milled or anything like that. Like, security is also an extra concern for pretty much everybody. And that goes for cherry collection, that goes for millers. Your fermentation tanks are open, your gate is open, your patios are open, whatever it may be. Your truck's going to port, everything. We've seen coffee stolen between the Port of Oakland and local warehouses in Oakland as well, due to, I don't know exactly, but there was like a false shipping company that was created and false delivery orders that were falsified, and people didn't catch it in time, and the container disappeared. And this is green coffee in Grain Pro. You know, I think it was at the Annex, I'm not really sure. But, you know, these things do happen, and they happen on the consumer side as well, because coffee has become very valuable thanks to the market.
All right, y'all, that's it for part 1. Tune in next week. We'll have the second half, which is audience Q&A from Source, a green buying panel hosted by Cafe Imports. See you later. Peace.
Hey everyone, that's the podcast for the week. Thanks so much for listening. If you heard something that inspired you, or if you heard something that gave you more questions than answers, send us an email to podcast@catandcloud.com. And if you're looking to know more about us, then head to our website at catandcloud.com, where you can find everything we have to offer. A great place to start would be The Answer, our house coffee that's right for any occasion. Or the Best Friends Blend, a coffee that tastes just as good as the good it does by donating $1 per pound back to our partnering producers. Also, if you're feeling extra friendly, connect with us in the usual places, like YouTube, Instagram, pretty much everywhere that's hip. All right, that's it. Thanks for being awesome, everyone, and we'll be back next week.